Hi everyone, I'm Doc Ken and welcome to Chapter 4 entitled Evolution, a Historical Perspective. So what are the learning outcomes for this chapter? One is to demonstrate understanding on evolution and its historical perspective. And lastly, to explain the different theories of evolution. So first, let's talk about Earth's history. In general geologic timescale, Earth is approximately more than 4.6 billion years, and existence has been present for about 2 billion years. In the specific geological timescale, first the solar system was formed. This was followed by forming of the planet Earth, then Earth's crust, then Earth's ocean, then Earth's temperature started to reduce, resulting to precipitation or rainfall. Then the first sign of life came out on Earth. So the very first organism to live on Earth have been bacteria. Then this was followed by the appearance of human being. There are three geologic eras currently identified in the Panerazoic eon. Eon is the largest classification of geologic timescale. Panerazoic means a visible life. Eras encompass major intervals of time and are defined based on the fossils life forms found. Panerazoic is divided into three eras. Just remember the acronym PAMEC. Pa, Paleozoic means old life. Me, Mesozoic means middle life. And lastly, C, Cenozoic means new life. First, let's talk about Paleozoic era. The oldest is the Paleozoic era, which means ancient life or old life. Fossils from the Paleozoic era include animals that are entirely extinct or are rare in the modern world. Paleozoic era is the oldest of the three eras and dates from 540 million to 248 million years ago. This era was the time when vertebrates dominated the Earth's ocean. During the age of Paleozoic era, fishes and amphibians were first to be appeared. Next in line, Mesozoic era. Mesozoic means middle life, and its fossils are a mixture of extinct groups and modern groups of animals. The Mesozoic era extended from 248 million to 65 million years ago. The Mesozoic era was important for the fossil remains of the dinosaurs and other reptiles that live. This era is also called Age of Reptiles for the reason that the dinosaurs appeared and other huge reptiles dominated the Earth's land. And lastly, Cenozoic era. The Cenozoic is the youngest era and the name means new life. This is because the fossils are similar to animals that are common today. This era is also known as the Age of Mammals for the reason that the first mammals appeared on Earth. The Cenozoic era began 65 million years ago with the extinction of the dinosaurs and continues into the present. The extinction of the dinosaurs at the end of the Mesozoic era opened up a vast new habitats and environments for early mammals and birds to adapt to and occupy. Hippopotamus, elephants, and rhinoceros are the only giant mammals left at present. Let's now move on to the evolution. Evolution is the change in the characteristics of a species over several generations and relies on the process of natural selection. The theory of evolution is based on the idea that all species are related and gradually change over time. So we have four evidences of evolution. Just remember the acronym FAV. F stands for fossils. H stands for homologous structure. A stands for analogous structure. And lastly, V stands for vestigial structure. Fossil is any preserved remains, impression, or trace of any once living thing from a past geological age. Examples include bones, shells, exoskeletons, stone imprints of animals. Next, homologous structure. What is homologous structure? It is an example of an organ or bone with similar underlying anatomical features found in different animals. These structures support the idea that different animals descend from a common ancestor and serve as evidence of evolution. Examples of this are reptiles' limbs, mammals' limbs, and birds' limbs. Next in line, analogous structure. Analogous structure refers to the similarity of function and superficial resemblance of structures that have different origins. Examples are insect wings and bird wings. And lastly, vestigial structure. A vestigial structure or a vestigial organ is an anatomical feature or behavior that no longer seems to have a purpose in the current form of an organism of the given species. A good example of this is wings on flightless birds like the ostrich. Let's now move on to Lamarck's theory of evolution, which he explained that evolution is a process of adaptation. So we have three theories of evolution according to Lamarck. Just remember the acronym UNI. U stands for Theory of Use and Disuse. N stands for Theory of Need. And lastly, I stands for Theory of Inheritance of Acquired Characteristics. First, let's talk about Theory of Use and Disuse. The use or disuse theory explains that the part of an organism that the organism uses will undergo hypertrophy and will become more developed. Hypertrophy is the growth of a specific organ or tissue. So by this idea, the more an organism uses a part of its body, the larger and more developed the part will become. The parts of the organisms that are not used as much undergo atrophy and begin to degrade from lack of use. This means that the part of an organism will get decreased in size due to the lack of use for that particular part of the organism. This is the beginning of the idea of inheritance of acquired traits. A good example of this is the persistent crawling of snake over time resulted to longer body and loss of the legs. Next, theory of need. According to Lamarck, new needs arise in animals as a result of a change in the environment. This leads to new types of behavior involving new uses of pre-existing organs. Their use leads to an increase in size or to other methods of functioning. Conversely, the use of other parts leads to their decline. A good example of this is as the snake needs to crawl in narrow places, its body develops into longer and legless forms. Lastly, the inheritance of acquired characteristics. The inheritance of acquired characteristics is the idea that the traits of an organism that undergo hypertrophy will be inherited by the next generation. This hypertrophy suggests an adaptation to the environment that can be passed on the next generation through the genetic code of the organism. A good example of this is the contemporary snakes, which do not have legs, inherited these traits from their ancestors that eventually vanish through the continued disuse. The most controversial of all revolutions is the Darwin Revolution. The Darwin Revolution is generally taken to be one of the key events in the history of Western science. In recent years, however, the very notion of a scientific revolution has come under attack, and in the specific case of Charles Darwin and his Origin of Species, there are serious questions about the nature of change and the specifically Darwin input. In this theory, he introduced a theory of evolution which postulated that population passed through a process of natural selection in which only the fittest would survive. He stated that organisms have the ability to adapt their environment and would gradually change into something that would be more competitive to survive, which is a process known as evolution. In this particular theory, we have four factors. What are those? Just remember the acronym VOSH. V stands for variation. O stands for overproduction. S stands for survival of the fittest. H stands for heritability. First, let's talk about variation. Variation is the key ingredient for survival of the species. And those species who have suitable variation that benefits them have higher chances of survival than those species who have no variation or who lack beneficial variation. Some variation are more favorable to environment than others, that's why they survive. Next, we have overproduction, which pertains to more organisms are produced that can actually survive. Naturally occurring species have a tendency to produce far more offspring that can possibly survive. There are not enough resources such as food, water, and space to support them. As you can see on the figure, based on the studies, sea turtles lay from 70 to 100 eggs, depending on the species. On average, 1 out of 100 survive. Young turtles are on their own after they hatch. Very few survive to maturity due to predation and competition for resources. Third is the survival of the fittest. According to Charles Darwin, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. As you can see on the figure, those giraffes who are responsive to change survive. Those giraffes with longer neck can actually survive because they can eat foods from the taller trees, while those giraffes with short neck died because of hungerness. And lastly, heritability or inheritance. Changes in the organism brought by an environment will be inherited by their offspring. So as you can see on the figure, variations are inherited. The best suited variants leave more offspring.